Have you ever asked yourself why a woman who clearly cares about you suddenly becomes quiet? Why the girl who once texted first, laughed easily, opened her heart, now pulls back without explanation? And the most painful question of all, what if she isn't avoiding you, but loving you too much? Stay with me, because today I'm going to show you the side of female psychology almost no man is taught to understand. And when you truly grasp this, it will completely change how you see silence, distance, and emotional withdrawal. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and watch until the very end, because one insight near the end may quietly save your next relationship without you realizing it. Let's begin. Most men are trained to read one signal only. If she pulls away, she must be losing interest. If she becomes slower to reply, she must be talking to someone else. If she creates distance, she must be emotionally detaching. But female psychology is not structured around surface behavior. It is structured around emotional safety. And this is the first uncomfortable truth. A woman can withdraw not because she feels nothing, but because she feels too much. Here is something very few men ever notice. Women do not run away from men who make them feel neutral. They emotionally protect themselves from men who make them feel vulnerable. This changes everything, because emotional vulnerability is not weakness for a woman. It is risk. When a woman feels emotionally safe, emotionally open, emotionally seen, she exposes her inner emotional world, and that world is extremely sensitive. So when feelings grow too deep, too fast, too intense, distance becomes self-protection, not rejection. Let me explain this clearly. When a woman truly starts to emotionally invest in you, 3 internal shifts begin. She becomes more aware of your opinion. She becomes more affected by your mood. She becomes more influenced by your presence. And that is beautiful. But it is also dangerous for her emotional stability. Because now, your silence hurts more. Your tone matters more. Your approval feels heavier. Your disapproval cuts deeper. So her nervous system begins asking one silent question. Is this emotional connection safe to deepen, or is it safer to pull back now? This is the emotional checkpoint most men never realize exists. Here is where the confusion begins. From the male perspective, emotional connection grows outward. We become more expressive, more present, more direct. But for many women, emotional connection grows inward first. It becomes internal pressure. And pressure without emotional certainty creates fear, not of you, of herself, of how much she feels, of how much power the bond is gaining. Now let's speak honestly. When a woman starts loving deeply, she does not become careless. She becomes cautious. Because love increases emotional consequences. And the deeper the emotional consequences, the higher the psychological risk. So she starts doing something that looks like avoidance, but is actually emotional regulation. Here is the first psychological pattern you must understand. When a woman loves you too much, she starts monitoring herself. She begins watching how quickly she replies. She becomes aware of how available she seems. She starts wondering if she is showing too much. She notices how easily you can influence her mood. She notices how strongly she reacts to small things you do. This self-monitoring is not manipulation. It is emotional containment. She is trying to slow down emotional momentum, so she does not fall too deeply before emotional security is confirmed. Now pay attention to this. A woman who is losing interest becomes emotionally disengaged. A woman who is loving too deeply becomes emotionally restrained. They look similar, but internally they are completely opposite. One is detaching, the other is holding herself back. This is the second pattern. When a woman loves you deeply, uncertainty becomes heavier. Not because she doubts you, but because she doubts emotional outcomes. She starts asking herself, what if I fall harder than he does? What if I open more than he ever will? What if I become emotionally dependent? What if I get hurt again? Female psychology does not fear love. It fears emotional imbalance. It fears asymmetry. It fears giving more than she receives. Now here is something painful but honest. Many women carry emotional memory, not logical memory. Emotional memory. They remember how it felt to trust the wrong man. They remember how it felt to open too fast. They remember how it felt to believe someone's emotional availability. So when you come into her life and feel different, when you make her nervous in a good way, when she notices her emotional walls lowering, her subconscious does not celebrate. It becomes alert. This is why she may start acting strange, not cold, not distant. Strange, less expressive, less impulsive, less emotionally visible. Because the moment she realizes I'm starting to care more than I expected. Her emotional defense system activates. Now let's go deeper. There is one emotional contradiction inside many women. They want emotional connection, but they fear emotional dependency, and dependency is not about you controlling her. It is about her losing emotional autonomy. Here is a powerful insight most men miss. When a woman feels herself becoming emotionally attached to you, she begins testing her own emotional independence. She asks silently, "Can I still regulate my mood without him? Can I still feel complete without his presence? Can I still function without his attention?" And one of the ways she tests this is by creating temporary emotional distance, not to punish you, not to manipulate you, but to check herself. Now let me tell you something uncomfortable. Many men accidentally destroy this moment. They panic, they chase, they seek reassurance, they pressure for emotional clarity, they overtext, they over-explain, they try to fix what is not broken. And this turns emotional safety into emotional pressure. Here is why this is dangerous. When a woman pulls back to regulate her emotions, and you respond with emotional urgency, her nervous system receives one message. This bond is becoming emotionally heavy. And emotional heaviness triggers protective withdrawal, not deeper connection. Let's clarify something. A woman who truly does not care will not struggle internally. She will not need emotional regulation. She will not wrestle with attachment. She will simply drift, silently, effortlessly, emotionally empty. But when a woman loves deeply, there is emotional friction. There is inner conversation. There is hesitation mixed with desire. Now let's move to something extremely important. Female psychology is deeply connected to emotional safety cues, not verbal promises, not future talk, not romantic words, but emotional consistency, tone, behavior, boundaries, self-control, emotional steadiness. A woman who loves you too much begins to watch how you emotionally lead, not how you impress, how you regulate. This is why you may notice something interesting. She becomes more observant. She studies your reactions. She notices how you handle frustration, how you talk about other people, how you treat emotional conflict, how you respond when things don't go your way. Because once emotional attachment forms, she is no longer just enjoying you. She is evaluating emotional risk. Here is the third psychological pattern. When a woman loves deeply, she becomes slower, not colder. Slower to trust, slower to expose, slower to emotionally escalate, slower to commit. Not because she is unsure about you, but because she is sure that her heart is becoming involved. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that sometimes, when you stop pushing, when you stop trying to clarify everything, when you stop seeking reassurance, she slowly comes back on her own? This is not coincidence. It is emotional relief. Now let's address the biggest misunderstanding. Men think emotional closeness is built through emotional acceleration. Women build emotional closeness through emotional safety. And safety requires space, not distance. Space, there is a difference. Distance is emotional absence. Space is emotional breathing room. When she loves you too much, she may suddenly become quieter. She may take longer to respond. She may avoid deep emotional conversations for a while. She may redirect focus to her life, her work, her friends, her routines. Not because you matter less, but because she is trying to stabilize her emotional center, so you do not become the only emotional anchor in her life. This is extremely healthy. But to an untrained man, it feels like rejection. Here is another uncomfortable truth. Strong emotional attachment creates fear of emotional loss, and fear of emotional loss changes behavior. She becomes cautious. She becomes protective. She becomes emotionally strategic, not manipulative. Strategic for her own emotional survival. Let's talk about something most dating advice never explains. A woman does not only evaluate the man, she evaluates the emotional future. She imagines what heartbreak would feel like. She imagines emotional imbalance. She imagines disappointment. And she measures whether the emotional risk is tolerable. This happens subconsciously. This is why sometimes, right when things are going well, right when emotional chemistry is strong, right when connection feels natural, she slows down, because emotional momentum has reached a threshold. Now here is something very powerful. If she were truly uninterested, your emotional presence would not disturb her inner balance. But if your presence has emotional gravity, she must adapt. Now let me tell you the biggest mistake men make during this phase. They interpret emotional restraint as emotional withdrawal. So they try to revive excitement. They increase attention. They increase validation. They increase emotional pursuit. They increase emotional exposure. But emotional saturation creates emotional suffocation. Here's the psychology. When a woman is trying to stabilize her emotional attachment, what she needs is emotional predictability, not emotional intensity, not emotional pressure, not emotional reassurance campaigns. Now let's go even deeper. There is a silent fear many women carry, the fear of losing themselves inside a relationship, especially women who have previously been emotionally overinvested. They know how easily identity can shift when love becomes central. So when a woman notices that you are becoming important, she will subconsciously protect her individuality by pulling back slightly, re-anchoring herself, reclaiming emotional autonomy. This is not disinterest. It is emotional maturity. Now pay attention to this carefully. If she still watches your stories, if she still reacts emotionally to your presence, if she still remembers small details, if she still subtly checks your emotional availability, if she still responds warmly even if slower, she is not disconnecting. She is recalibrating. Now let's talk about the part most men never want to hear. You cannot force emotional security. You cannot negotiate emotional safety. You cannot rush emotional trust. And you cannot convince a nervous system to relax through logic. Emotional safety is built only through consistent emotional leadership. What does emotional leadership mean? It means you do not become reactive when she pulls back slightly. You do not punish with silence. You do not interrogate her emotional shifts. You do not demand clarity in moments of emotional transition. You remain emotionally centered. Here is something extremely important. When a woman loves deeply, she is hypersensitive to emotional pressure. Pressure feels dangerous. Even gentle pressure, even well-intended pressure, even romantic pressure. Now let's talk about a very specific psychological mechanism. The more emotionally important you become to her, the more careful she becomes with you. She becomes careful with what she says, careful with how she reacts, careful with how much she reveals. Because now, your perception matters, your judgment matters, your emotional response matters. Now let me show you how to recognize the difference. Avoidance feels empty. Emotional restraint feels tense. Avoidance feels disengaged. Emotional restraint feels conflicted. Avoidance has emotional neutrality. Emotional restraint has emotional undercurrent. Now here is something very subtle. When a woman is avoiding you, she does not emotionally mirror you anymore. But when a woman loves you too much and pulls back, she still mirrors. Quietly, subtly, without realizing it. Now let's address the question every man is silently asking. What should you actually do when this happens? The answer is simple, but not easy. You do not try to fix her emotions. You do not try to accelerate her comfort. You do not try to extract reassurance. You become emotionally consistent. Here is what consistency looks like. You remain warm. You remain respectful. You remain grounded. You remain responsive without being urgent. You remain interested without being invasive. You remain present without becoming dependent. This sends one powerful psychological signal. This man does not collapse emotionally when connection fluctuates. That is safety. Let me be very direct with you. A woman who is emotionally regulating herself does not need more affection. She needs emotional stability. She needs to know that connection with you does not threaten her inner balance. Now let's go to something extremely important. The strongest attraction for a woman who loves deeply is emotional self-control in a man, not emotional suppression. Emotional mastery. When she sees that you do not become anxious when things slow down, when she sees that you continue your life confidently, when she sees that your identity is not built around her attention, her nervous system relaxes, and relaxation invites emotional return. Here is the paradox. The fastest way to make her feel safe reconnecting is to stop trying to reconnect, not emotionally disconnect, but emotionally detach from outcomes. This is not game playing. This is emotional independence. Now let's talk about something many men misunderstand. When a woman pulls back because she cares too much, she often hopes that you will not chase her. Not because she wants to be ignored, but because she wants confirmation that you are emotionally sovereign, that you are not relying on her emotional availability to regulate yourself. Here is a very deep truth. Women do not feel safe with men who emotionally lean on them too heavily. Even if they love them, especially if they love them, Now let's talk about the moment that usually happens next. If you remain emotionally centered, if you do not dramatize the shift, if you allow space without emotional punishment, she will slowly open again, but differently, more carefully, more consciously, more grounded, not impulsively. This is how mature emotional bonds form, not through emotional fireworks, through emotional reliability. Now let me tell you something that will save you years of confusion. A woman who loves you too much is not afraid of you. She is afraid of what loving you might cost her emotionally. That is why she slows down. That is why she recalibrates. That is why she steps back. Now here is the most important lesson of this entire video. You do not create emotional safety by convincing her. You create it by being emotionally predictable in your character. If you disappear emotionally when she pulls back, she learns that emotional connection is fragile. If you become cold, she learns that emotional space is punished. If you become reactive, she learns that emotional honesty is risky. But if you remain steady, she learns that emotional connection with you is stable. This is the psychological foundation of deep attachment. Not excitement, not mystery, not seduction tactics, stability. Now I want to speak to you directly. If you're experiencing this right now, if a woman in your life has become quieter, but not emotionally gone, if you still feel emotional tension between you, if the connection still exists beneath the surface, do not sabotage it by misreading emotional self-protection as rejection. Here is your quiet power in this situation. Live your life fully. Keep your rhythm. Keep your projects. Keep your purpose. Keep your emotional discipline. Because the most attractive emotional signal to a woman who is regulating deep feelings is this. This man is emotionally whole with or without me. Now let me leave you with one final psychological truth. The women who love the deepest are often the women who slow down the most, because they understand what emotional investment truly costs. And the men who lose the best connections are often the men who panic at the first sign of emotional restraint. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is protection. Distance is not always rejection. Sometimes it is emotional recalibration. And withdrawal is not always emotional coldness. Sometimes it is the quiet discipline of a woman who feels more than she expected to. If this message helped you understand her psychology more deeply, write one word in the comments. Clarity. Because the man who understands emotional rhythm will always be ahead of the man who only understands emotional signals. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.